Can you see? I don't know if people can see us yet. I'm assuming maybe they can.
I don't know either. Normally, yes, it appears. I think. Can you guys see us? Just out of
Someone
curiosity.
tell us. Can you see
Because
us?
normally at this, there is like a thing that says you are live. Well, we got 82 people watching us. So I guess,
Oh,
yes.
you are live. Sound is good.
All right. So
Okay.
everybody, we have achieved the impossible, which is we appear to have figured out how both of us can be on the screen at the same time and how we can live stream to a number of different places.
Don't ask us how long it took.
So we should definitely go out and buy lottery tickets. But I am doing this in part here because I am hoping to institute a regular chat with Joanne because we have so much fun together. And she is doing it because I wouldn't stop poking her to do it, but also because
I wanted to say a special hello to my webcast people tomorrow morning. I'm pre-recording my episode. I do a webcast every Friday morning. And the special treat for folks this week, since I can't be there live, is that Heather's going to be there, and Heather should say hello to the History Matters community.
I will. And thank you for being here, History Matters people. And you have a special treat because actually, you know, Joanne and I always say we don't really plan these out, and we mostly don't, but we do talk a lot about what's happening in the world today and how the past illuminates that. And one of the things that seems to me to be coming together really closely with what Joanne does in this moment is the idea that with the courts trying their best in many ways to support us, but the House, the Senate, and the White House all belonging to people who are trying to tear down the government. A lot of people just are throwing up their hands and saying, you know, what can we do? All the barricades have been stormed. And Joanne has a very important answer to that I think really matters today. And that's the importance of the role of people speaking up, the idea of legitimacy in the American government, and how those things came together during the revolution or during the period before what we know as the Revolutionary War. And so I'm really hoping that in the time we have, Joanne, you can kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, well, it's something I think about a lot because I certainly can understand how many people, including occasionally me, feel that, you know, what good does our voice do at a moment where it feels like things are swimming out of control and every 10 minutes there's a new executive order. But the fact of the matter is, and we see this all the time. We just saw it today where they brought back, they were going to cancel phone access to Social Security. And then it was brought, I think the Washington Post broadcast it and people objected. And then they took that back and they said, no, we're not going to do that. My larger point here is our voice matters. And our government and our nation was created on that assumption. What the thinking was of the founder folk was that they were not creating a monarchy. They were very definitely going anti-monarchy in what they were creating. And in their minds, one of the distinctive things about a small r Republican form of government was that public opinion matters. The people matter, their voice matters a lot. And they took that seriously. It's almost comical when you look at like James Madison's letters or George Washington's letters. They're trying to figure out public opinion. They don't know who the public is really, and they don't know how to get their opinion, but they know it's vitally important and that they're supposed to be guided by the public and what they think.
Why is popular opinion so enormously important in this government that they're setting up?
What a fine question. Because the government is grounded on us.
I'm joking about that because we often joke when we're trying to make the obvious stuff work, you know, that we both have PhDs from fairly high ranking institutions. And we're like, I don't know where this goes, do you? So that was a joke. It's sort of an inside joke that I'm letting you in on. But go ahead and explain why, because you think about the way the world looked in the 1770s, who cared what people thought, right? Except these guys do. Why? Why does it matter?
Because the government, this new government, this experimental government, which is the word they use all the time, was grounded on us. Now, we the people, who's included in we the people has changed a lot over the years. But the fact of the matter is The assumption is that the people in office, the people who are in office, are serving us, owe us their power, and we have the voice and the right to speak up and shape what's going on.
Okay, so let me say that back to you, because I think this is a really important concept that you put me onto. And that's that in the Declaration of Independence, it talks about how government's legitimacy depends upon the consent of the governed. And that's a paraphrase. That's not exactly what it is, but it says, unless the government has the support of the people over whom it governs, it is not legitimate. So what you're saying, I think, and I'm not trying to play anything clever here, I'm just trying to make sure I've got it, is that because the government depends on the support of the people, that they have to figure out somehow what the support of the people is. So they're running around trying to figure that out. And by the way, that's a struggle all the way through our history. When you've got people trying to say, this is what people think, no, this is what people think. And in the 20th century, the late 19th and early 20th, you start to get polls, you start to get all these different ways of guessing what people actually think. But the flip side of that is, if you don't have the support of the people, you are not legitimate, right?
Correct. Which is why, even in this early period, they're running around trying to figure out public opinion, because just as you said, and legitimacy is the word to use, the government's legitimacy rests on the public, the American public, what we think matters. And generally speaking, our government is a representative government, and the people we give power to are supposed to be accountable to us for the way they use that power. Accountability obviously is an essential element in democracy, and that's something that right now is being challenged in a whole bunch of ways. But the important point here is that throughout American history, all the way back to the people framing the Constitution, and even before, the revolution was a people's revolution. It wasn't a revolution with 8 guys in a room. The assumption has always been that it's the voice of the people. It's we, the people, that matter. And when we get together, when we remember that, when we speak up and speak out, when we, and I granted, it feels like the ultimate sort of anticlimactic thing for me to say, like, contact your member of Congress. But when the people unite in speaking out, in being loud and saying what they think, it matters. And it may not feel like it matters. And it may seem as though, you know, the cloud coming down over our heads, that somehow or other it won't. But again and again and again, when we get really loud, when lots of us get really loud and speak out and call our members of Congress and make our voices known, take up space, it has an impact. Even the people who are in office, who are not particularly attached to democracy right now, for them to have their jobs right now, they rely on us. They may not want to have town hall meetings. They may not want to think about their constituents per se, but if they want to keep their jobs right now, that's up to their constituents. That's up to us.
Well, yes, except, so I agree with you. And what I agree with you that you certainly can change policies. And we've seen that happen again and again. Policies change depending on the voice of the people. But, and you've talked, I think, not here today, but in the past, you've talked about how it's really important to make it clear, even to members of Congress and other lawmakers who are never going to change their opinions, yes, that you don't agree with them, because the more pressure they feel, the more it demonstrates to other people
to know
that they are not representing the American people.
Precisely.
But here's a question for you, and I hope I'm not completely being unfair here. But if it's true that a government that does not have the support of the people is not legitimate, doesn't that raise sort of systemic problems with the fact that we've had a number of presidents who did not, for example, win the popular vote recently? And those are quite different than the ones in the past when that happened. But also, what do we do in this moment when you can see the Trump administration trying very hard to insist that everything that they are doing is part of a mandate, which is complete crap? More people voted for somebody other than Donald Trump than voted for him. And the policies that he's enacting are enormously unpopular. But what does that do to our system if, in fact, we have a president who is not, does not have the will of the people behind him?
Well,
What did the framers do with that? Because that happens not infrequently. But now, when you literally have them driving us off a cliff, is the only remedy impeachment? Or like, where do we fit into that?
It's important to remember that the founders didn't assume the president was the be-all, end-all job. I mean, so part of the reason that they were worried about the president as someone having too much power, and they were worried about popular opinion picking maybe someone for president that was going to be a demagogue and bad things would happen. But they also assumed that the president wasn't the be-all, end-all. And so if the president, they certainly understood that because of the Electoral College, things might happen that would not indicate the people are with them. But like, what is our Congress? But it's supposed to be a direct link to us, a direct connection to us. So in their mind, I mean, the old, Warren checks and balances, that had a real meaning to it, which was, it's a representative government. We are represented in Congress. We have the right to vote for a president. And yes, some presidents are going to have the popular vote and some are not. If it's a free and fair election, okay. But as long as we are represented, we've put people in office that represent us, not just the president, but members of Congress, local government, then then we are at the base of that government. And then that does matter. I mean, we've talked about this before. It's not until late in the game that the president becomes the big deal, right? The most of the 19th century, everyone's focused on Congress. That's where all the action is. That's where the power is. That's newspaper column inches are full of congressional debate. It's late in the game that you get into what is now the assumption that the government is the president.
So yeah, largely post World War II, or at least post New Deal, or part of the New Deal. That's kind of FDR-ish. Although I can already hear people saying Woodrow Wilson, but that's
you can hear people say.
So but I have another. So here's another piece of this though, because I love this idea that our voices matter, and we know they do matter in policy. But I'm actually looking at the systemic nature of American government, which is in real trouble right now. And one of the things that I was sort of pushing for there, and some people have said, is that this government is not legitimate any longer. And that is a real crisis. Now, I'm not sure about that. I suspect it's not legitimate for some other reasons, but that kind of brings me back to the present. Like, what do we do systemically going forward? And let me suggest, continuing to complain, continuing to make our voices heard, and so on. But you, it sounds like, are suggesting we need to continue to put pressure on the Congress, which I agree with. But let me try this. One of the things that has come up again and again and again in my email and so on is, where are our leaders? Why don't we have any leaders? And I would suggest maybe looking at the 1850s primarily, but also the 1880s and the 1890s, that what you see in a moment like this, when there is such a divorce between what the government is doing and what the majority of the people want, the more the people agitate and the more they articulate what they want, the more likely they are to create a leader who truly represents them. So Abraham Lincoln, for example, in 1854, he had his term in Congress. He was not, probably he was a corporate lawyer. Probably nobody would have heard from him again, except he listened to the people who were incredibly unhappy about the elite enslavers taking over the government. And they created him. They're kind of leader as Batman, right? So, we create our leaders by using our voices. Is that fair?
No, that totally is, because as you noted, what happens in the late 1850s is that there's a new kind of Northern congressman who, the people are upset. The slave power in Congress is beating down, literally and figuratively, the North to promote slavery. And people in Congress, and then people back in the North, and then it shapes who comes to Congress. They want people to fight. And what is now the Republican Party, when it starts out, it's an anti-slavery party, and the people who come to Congress as Republicans literally come saying, we are here to fight the slave power. That is what we have been voted in to do. They are created, that party is created, and those leaders are created by people saying and voting into office and making it clear they want people to stand up to the people who are being oppressive. They want people to speak out. And these particular leaders knew that they were behaving in some ways that former leaders from the North perhaps had not behaved. They understood this. They also understood that this was a time. What did I do wrong?
You didn't do anything wrong, but I just love, like you said, former leaders might not have behaved in the way that they were. It's like they were weenies. You know? And so you get Anson Burlingame in there after Preston Brooks beats Charles Sumner almost to death on the floor of the Congress, your field of blood. Yeah. Anson Burlingame comes in and says, we're going to fight you. And all of a sudden, he becomes this enormous hero. He becomes a legend.
Absolutely. He has crowds following him where he goes to speak. And when people try to shut these guys up, right, when Southerners are like, we know who you guys are, shut up, these people say, no, we're a different kind of congressman now. We don't sit down anymore. We're here for a totally different reason, and we're going to behave differently, so don't take that for granted. So the dynamic changes. And yes, so those leaders are created by people making it clear they want people to stand up and speak for them in a way that is not happening yet.
So let me push even further on that. The angrier and the more vocal the people are about what they want, maybe not angry even, just the more vocal they are about what they want, the more you get the rise of new media articulating that, which I would suggest is the point we're at right now. The same way in the 1850s, we got the Chicago Tribune and the New York Daily Tribune and the changes in the Philadelphia Inquirer and all the things that happened then. We now think of them as legacy papers, but at the time they were brand new and really pushing back against the elite enslavers, the slave power as it was known. But once you do that, you get the rise of, say, an Abraham Lincoln. But what was cool about Lincoln in that, and this is one of the things that I'm sort of playing with, is he takes all that, which is really different, spotty. Different people want different things. And he brings it together into an articulated ideology. And I don't see that anywhere right now.
No.
I see a lot of this from a lot of wonderful people and a lot of wonderful new voices. But we're not seeing yet an articulated, this is what we're doing and why.
Right. No, absolutely. Well, that's absolutely true. But I was about to say, what I paused on was, we are now seeing some people, Tim Walz, right, saying if you're not going to have town meetings, if Republican congressmen don't want to have town meetings, I'll show up and we can talk and we can have a conversation. That, I think, is a brilliant idea. I think that's a superb idea. It's like, because that's what should be happening. And if someone won't allow that to happen, someone else can show up and say, okay, ask your questions, let's talk. But you're right. We need more, and that's part of a message, right? That's not necessarily an ideology, but the message there is that the people still matter, you still matter, and you're worth listening to, and I will show up and listen to what you have to say. But you're right, there hasn't been that coming together for people to unite behind.
Although, I mean, I think it will happen faster now than it did in the 1850s, simply because we have so much quicker access to media and to ideas. But I hadn't thought about that certainly I've looked at the fact that the radical right is not holding town halls anymore, and Democrats are in all sorts of places, including Democrats who lost their last elections, which I love. They're holding them all kinds of places, and I had thought about that as sort of a way to connect with voters, but it's actually a form of listening to popular opinion.
And just like speaking up and being loud, even if you're speaking up and being loud to people who you know will not change their mind and disagree with you, the being loud matters. That at the same way that this is modeling how things should be, that people, these leaders are engaging with us, with the public, showing that the public voice matters, showing that public opinion matters, showing that the public's presence matters in a way that we're not seeing really right now, broadly speaking. And thus kind of gets us back to where we started. Thus, we end up feeling isolated and powerless, and what can we do and what should we do? One of the things that should be happening, and that's people having these town meetings, we need to be seeing the people being listened to in some way, right? We need reminders that we actually really matter. We do. And I honestly, it's one of the things I've been saying forever and ever and ever. And I always feel like it sounds like false cheery, like, yay, we really matter. But our voice does matter in ways that we aren't aware. And if we're loud, we've seen it over and over and over again for years now, that something happens that seems massively bad and unpopular, and then it's pulled back because there's a fuss, because people make a fuss. And it's hard to have faith in that idea right now, but we have to.
Well, and I think you're saying something much broader than that, well, certainly our voices matter with individual policies, but the larger concept that the American government rests on the will of the people is fundamental. And then the next step in this moment is that the government is not listening to the people. And the way that you get a new government is to articulate very clean, repeatedly what you care about, even if it's not what the person next to you cares about, because the more press that gets, both in social media, talking to people, and in media that's out there, the more likely we will have different leaders at the national level coming together to articulate a new form of government that creates all sorts of new alliances that may not have been there in the past. I mean, I'm fascinated by the whole, the increasing emphasis on not wanting billionaires to take over our country, which is, of course, one of the key things that has managed to create new coalitions throughout our history, all the way back to the colonial era. Right.
Now, go ahead. I was just going to say, I can see in the chat that some people are saying this is, it's going to take too long. It's not a good strategy. It's, it's going to be too late. Which is logical that people are saying that. So how do you respond to that?
Well, so I feel like that's a different thing that we should talk about. But one of the problems, I think, with people understanding what's happening right now is there's so much bad stuff coming down. I had this conversation with somebody recently, that somebody like me who's trying to cover it all, you end up having to focus on the bad stuff because it's so unprecedented in so many ways. You want to keep a record of, the crash of the stock market, or the, turn away from NATO, or all the different things we've been doing. And what we're not writing as much about is exactly what you're talking about: the protests, the legal pushbacks, all the many ways in which, in fact,
Sanders having these big
votes. Well, and the degree to which that Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency and Trump are having to back off, or having to adjust things. Or I will say in this moment, and I don't know if we're going to save this video, but Trump's not okay. I mean, he was under severe mental strain before the election, and he's a 78, almost 79-year-old man, and not in good health. And he is completely incoherent in this moment, which is creating a different crisis. So, I don't think it's clear. Things are bad. I'm not suggesting things are not bad. They're bad. But I don't think it's clear that this strategy is not working. I mean, Trump was trying to sell Teslas on the White House lawn the other day because the people have spoken out to the degree they have against Tesla.
And which is a great example, right? That protest against Teslas got through so powerfully that there was a freaking car ad in front of the White House very quickly, right? That happened very quickly. And that's right. I should have mentioned that before. That's a great example of precisely what we're talking about here.
So again, I think there's other things you and I need to talk about and will talk about. Although we're trying to keep these short so that people can go on about their lives, at least this particular one. Although I still haven't figured out where the clock is on this thing.
I don't know how long we've been talking.
That's right. Well, I think it's coming up on 25 minutes, I think. Okay. So I think we should do those. But the reason that I always pick on you about this idea of the people mattering so much is because we're not really articulating that. And its larger importance in America. And you're the only person I know who keeps saying this. And of course, if you think about colonial America in 1763, at the end of the French and Indian War, most colonials or colonists were perfectly happy to be part of the British system. And yet within less than 15 years, at least a third of them had decided that wasn't okay any longer. And that's freaking huge in a day when you got news by the how fast it could go up the river.
No, that's true. And the important thing to remember also in that early period is people who were colonists, their government was right up like close by. They knew the people in the government. The government was immediate in a way. And they had charters and contracts that listed exactly what it was that they were part of. So they actually, in those early years, had a direct link with government in a way that over time we have less of. So yes, they made this dramatic switch from being part of the British Empire and the king mightier than all, and having him be the father of everything. And yeah, what they in a relatively short amount of time, and again, because the people became engaged, it was a people's revolution. They made a dramatic change. Now, some of what helped that was dramatic things happening to push them in that direction. So, for example, when they learned that British troops were firing on colonists in Lexington and Concord, people were like, there are people who talk about that in the same way that we talk about where we were when we heard about 9/11, or where we were when we heard about the Challenger explosion. There are people who say, when I heard about Lexington and Concord, I was preparing lunch for my family, and because it was that kind of a shock about what was happening that shouldn't be happening that drove people to act.
Do you know, I feel that way about February 28th. What happened in the Oval Office with Zelensky and Vance and Trump, because that was horrible on any number of levels. Certainly the fact that there was a Russian state media and not the AP or Reuters in there, which was itself bizarre. They tried to back away from that, but that's what it was. But then in the way that we treated an ally and all those things, but that was 80 years of our history dumped into what Jasmine Crockett would call the shitter. And I hope that we remember it. That, I mean, look, I know the date. I literally don't know what day it is today, but I know February 28th.
Oh, well, right. That was, yeah, that kind of hit you in the soul.
In the soul.
It was mortifying to see. Yeah.
Why don't we pack it in and see if these things actually showed up where they were supposed to show up?
Yeah, I know. This is an experiment.
And you know what's fun? And we can save it or not. You guys should let us know if you liked it, although I'm not sure I put the settings right so that the comments will show up on YouTube. I hope they do.
Oh.
Apparently, I said it was for children because I thought it'd be good for people to watch stuff like this, but it turns out that means you don't have comments. Who knew?
Oh.
Yeah, because sometimes the comments are not appropriate for children. But I thought I was doing something to make it wider. It was actually narrower. Who knows whether that's the case any longer. And we'll see if it all turned out right. And if you guys like this, we will find a time to institute this on a regular basis. Maybe not always heavy duty. Maybe I'll teach you how to knit, Joanne.
I kind of know how to knit.
Oh my God. I didn't know that.
Well, but bad. You'll have to reteach me. I love the reaction.
I did not see that coming. I did not see that coming.
I'm looking at my knitting over here. I have the world's longest scarf because I forget how to knit, and then I remind myself and I add to the scarf.
I'll teach you to make mittens.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. It's lovely to see you again, and maybe this maybe be the start of what we intended to do all those years ago.
All those years ago, before we had our podcast.
Well, we were trying to institute this very thing, and then somebody suggested that we should do a podcast, and we got sidetracked and did that. But this was actually the original thought. And having now figured out how to ask you, maybe in the future I can ask the other person that we intended to do that with, and she can visit us sometimes too, maybe even other people. But for now, lovely to see you. Love you, Joanne.
I love you too.
Bye. Maybe bye. Who the hell knows?
I know. That's right. Now what do I press?
Exactly. Talk to you soon.
Okay.